Good morning, good afternoon. My name is James Bogart. I'm CEO and President of Bogart Wealth. Thanks for taking some time to listen to our presentation on Mega Backdoor Roth strategies. Actually, first time we've done this one as a webinar. Before I get going, I do have the question and answer box open. I also have the chat box open. I will do my absolute best to answer questions real time. At the end of the presentation, we are going to be asking for a survey. If you'd be so kind as to take a couple minutes to complete the survey, we'd really appreciate it. And then we are recording the presentation. We'll be having it up on the website. If you'd like to get a copy of the slides or the recording, Mindy is going to be following up at the end of the event, and she'd be delighted to send you a copy. But quick introduction on Bogart Wealth. Bogart Wealth is a registered investment advisory firm. We're managing approximately $980 million of client assets. It's about 700 households, roughly about 90% of them are major oil company employees. We do have several different companies represented on the call today. Got about 140 attendees today. So I'm going to try to make this as neutral as possible. I am going to get into some specific company plan examples at the end. But Bogart Wealth's core competencies and specialties are financial planning, investment management, tax optimization, and tax preparation. All seamlessly integrated as part of our service model. We are true fiduciaries for our clients, so we're legally obligated to put our clients and prospective clients' interest above our own. We have 16 folks as part of our wealth management and planning team. We've got 4 folks as part of our tax team. We've got 3 different office locations, one up in McLean, Virginia, one in Houston, Texas, and one in the Woodlands, Texas. Our mission is to help our clients achieve financial peace of mind by preserving and maximizing intergenerational wealth. I commonly will say, anybody who's attended one of these before, but your kids and your parents can be some of the largest variables of anyone's financial plan. We've made it part of our firm's culture to give their children access to certified financial planners. It's not uncommon that the kids don't want to listen to mom and dad, but also we know the direct impact that we can have as early as possible. And our goals are aligned of wanting to have a relationship with them as well. So today is actually a little bit of a side note off of the traditional retirement readiness series that we do. But we do webinars. I'm trying to do them almost every single week, but we've got 8 kind of core events that we do. We are recording all of them. They're all going up on our website. I've recorded almost every one of these now at this point, but we do one on the retirement planning timeline. We do one on retirement income planning. We do one on Social Security and Social Security strategies, one on tax and tax optimization strategies, one on estate planning strategies, one on net unrealized appreciation and post-retirement income strategies, one on long-term care and long-term care insurance, and one on Roths versus traditional 401ks and IRAs. Obviously today is a specific drill into talking about Mega Backdoor Roths and what those are. But this list came from our audience. And if there's something that you would like for us to present on, we are delighted to, at a minimum, we'll add it to an existing one, or I'll do an add-on and talk about different ones, different topics going forward. All right, so specific to today, I'm going to start off by doing a quick overview of different retirement account plan types. And the reason for it is because it sets the stage for some of the different components related to what a Mega Backdoor Roth is. We're going to get into Roth conversions, some of the basics and some of the reasons why you want to consider converting. I'll talk about how Mega Backdoor Roth strategies work. We're going to give a couple different examples. One's going to include a company match, one's without a company match. Then we're going to get into what we should look at for the rest of 2020, and then maybe what it would look like going forward 2021 and beyond. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about some specific examples in plan Roth conversions versus after tax withdrawals and what the implications are there. All right. So just to get started, first we want to introduce what are qualified accounts. Now, qualified accounts is specifically talking about traditional 401ks, IRAs, 403bs, 457s. And the good part with qualified accounts is that you're putting money in on a before tax basis. All of the growth plus the dividends is completely tax deferred. And historically, that's also where you're going to receive a company match. And historically, it goes into the pre-tax portion of a 401k. Now, with qualified accounts, there are a couple negatives. The first is if you're under 59 and a half, there's 10% penalty to take money out. of qualified accounts. Also, every dollar you've put in plus the gain off of that money when you go to take it out is taxed as ordinary income. And then when you reach that magical age of 72, you have what are called required minimum distributions. You might hear me use the acronym RMD for that. But what RMDs are is that at 72, you're required to start taking out a percentage of your retirement accounts every single year, and that percentage increases every single year. So to talk about a little bit of the limitations or contribution amounts. So with 403Bs, 401Ks and Roth 401Ks, if you're under the age of 50, you can put $19,500 into those plans. If you're over the age of 50, you get to do what's called a catch-up contribution of $6,500. And there's a total contribution limit to those plans. So if you're under 50, you can do 57,000. If you're over the age of 50, you can actually put as much as 63,500 in. But you still would be capped at, if you're over 50, 26,000 on a before tax basis. And then the rest can go in either with company match components or after tax contributions that you can put into the plan. And the real reason we go into these numbers is because this is exactly what's setting the stage for what a mega backdoor Roth contribution is. Now, one of the things we talk about is prioritization of savings and where we want to see people saving first. You know, and as a financial planner, I use the joke a lot, but the planner and us will have you work till you're 80, we'll have you die at 81, we'll have you save every dollar you make and leave nothing left to live on. It's a horrible joke, but there's a lot of truth to it. The longer you work, the more you're going to have, the more you save, the more you're going to have. And so when we talk about prioritization of savings, we really do encourage saving first in the pre-tax environment. So traditionals and not necessarily loading up on Roth on the first dollars that get saved. And the real reason for that is because the progressive tax structure that we have is in the US really does favor traditional 401k contributions. And what this means is for example, if you're married, filing jointly, the first $19,750 of your income is taxed at 10%. The next up to $80,250 is taxed at 12%. But if you made right at $80,250, your effective tax rate is 11.5. If you made right up to the top end of the 22, which is $171,050, that's 22% bracket, but your effective tax rate 17.1. And it continues on. The point that we're making here is that your contributions, when you put them in on a before tax basis, it's reducing your taxable income at the highest marginal bracket. So for example, if you make $326,600, it's reducing, if you put $26,000 in and you're over the age of 50, it's reducing your taxable income down to $300,600. So it's saving you at the highest marginal bracket. Now, when you go to pull money out, when you declare ordinary income, what you actually pay is your effective tax rate. So if you're reducing your taxable income at the 24% bracket, but you're actually paying, for example, 20.4%, obviously it'd be a little bit less than that. But the example really is that you're paying less in taxes, reducing your taxable income, but what you're actually paying out of your pocket is lower than what your marginal tax rate. Now, a couple other things to talk about here. Traditional IRAs. Now, traditional IRAs, you can put an additional $6,000 in if you're under the age of 50 with a $1,000 catch-up. Now, a lot of people don't know that they can actually do an IRA contribution in addition to their 401k contributions. Now, if you're over the age of 50, again, it's an additional $1,000, so it's $7,000 of total dollars of contribution. Now, there is no income threshold if you plan on not taking a deduction. Now, if you want to have a deduction, your income needs to be below a certain level, and it depends on if you or a spouse are participating in a retirement plan. So for example, if you're covered by a plan, meaning you have a retirement plan you can participate in, if you're single and make over 75,000, you're not eligible to do a deduction. If you're married and covered by a plan, it's 124,000. And if your spouse is covered by a plan, it's up to 206,000. So if you're married and make over 206, there is no ability to deduct an IRA contribution, but you can still put it in on an after-tax basis. And this is what actually sets the stage for what's called a backdoor Roth conversion. A little bit different than the mega backdoor, and I'll talk about that in a second. All right, so I also want to talk about what Roth accounts are. Now, Roth accounts are when we put money in on an after-tax basis. And the growth will happen completely tax-free. You'll have tax-free withdrawals as long as you're over the age of 59 and a half and that Roth has been in existence for 5 years. The other really nice part about Roths is that they are not subject to those required minimum distributions. Little caveat to that, though, is if you're putting money into the Roth 401k within your retirement plan, Roth 401ks are subject to required minimum distributions. So a little bit of a tangent, but if you do have Roth 401k within your 401k or savings plan, odds are by the time you reach the age of 72, I'm a big believer, go ahead and take advantage of a rollover, move the Roth 401k piece into a Roth IRA, keep your pre-tax portions into a traditional IRA. That way the Roth component is not being eligible for RMDs because Roth IRAs are not. And obviously, if you're in a situation where you're leaving money to heirs, it does allow for tax-free growth, not only while you're alive, but also for at least the initial phase of when they inherit the money, and it can be tax-free for them as well. Whereas if it's in the qualified environment, so a 401k or an IRA, when the kids inherit it, they have to take it out and they have to pay ordinary income. So there's kind of a double amplification of the benefit of using Roths, especially if you're in the situation where you're leaving money to the kids. Now, Roth IRAs, there's actually 2 ways of getting money into Roth IRAs. So a Roth IRA, again, same contribution limits as you have within the traditional IRA. So if you're under 50, you can do $6,000. If you're over 50, you can do an additional $1,000 contribution, so $7,000 total. Now, with Roth contributions, there's income limitations. And if you're single and make over $139,000, you cannot contribute to a Roth. If you're married, it's 206. And so that would then preclude you from being able to do a contribution. However, you can do what are called Roth conversions. Now, Roth conversions have no income limitation, and really you kind of get capped out based upon the amount that you are willing to pay taxes. So if you're currently in a high bracket, it doesn't necessarily make sense to do Roth contributions. Obviously, you can't do Roth contributions, excuse me, but it doesn't necessarily make sense to do Roth conversions while you're in a high bracket, because more often than not, when someone is retired, they're going to be in a lower bracket than where they are today. However, if you've retired and all of a sudden your bracket is significantly lower than where it was when you were working, now all of a sudden that opens up the opportunity to do Roth conversions in retirement. So a couple basic things to talk about Roth conversions, and we'll get into some of the reasons why. So a conversion is a penalty-free taxable transfer of amounts from a traditional IRA or 401k over to a Roth. Now, you can convert part or all of your money that's in an IRA over to a Roth, and when you convert from a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA, you pay income tax on the taxable amount that you converted. So it's important to talk about that, and we'll get into some examples here in a minute. Now, prior to 2010, most households weren't eligible to do this. If you made over a modified adjusted gross income of $100,000, you weren't even able to do this. However, after 2010, they removed the income threshold, and so you could theoretically have unlimited income and do Roth conversions. It just may or may not actually make sense to do that. So a couple things to talk about with kind of the reasons to convert. Regular contributions are allowable at any age. So if you have earned income, you can actually do Roth contributions at any point in time. Qualified distributions from Roths are completely tax-free, and really can't ingrain the point enough that Roth IRAs are not subject to required minimum distributions. Now, we really need to talk about the ultimate benefit of the why. If you're looking for diversification from a tax exposure perspective, we really like Roths. Was your income too high to participate in a Roth while you were still actively working? Most likely. And if you are, what does it look like afterwards? And then, do you think taxes are going to rise in the future? I personally do. And frankly, we do know that with no legislative reform in 2026, tax rates are going to be higher than where they are today. And then obviously, if you're in a position where you're leaving money to the next generation, let's optimize and let's find ways to not only minimize tax implications for you while you're still alive, especially when you get into the mode of having required minimum distributions, but then also let's optimize in terms of that transition of wealth to the next generation. Now, kind of summarizing the benefits. So reasons that we want to convert or look at converting. If your income taxes are going to be higher in the future, we want to do conversions now. Now, if you expect your income and spending to go up significantly faster than inflation between now and the end of your plan, we also want to look at converting. If income tax rates are going to go up all in the future, we want to do conversions now, which again, between now and 2026, we know we high probability that we are going to see a higher tax structure. If you're fortunate enough to be in what we've affectionately grown to call RMD prison, and what this means is that the required amount that you have to take out of IRAs and 401k plans are higher than what you want to be spending, it's going to drive your tax rates up. And it's important to talk about and have a plan for that between now and retirement. It also helps reduce some of the pain of future tax bills, and not only for you, but also potentially for your kids. And again, at that last point, if you anticipate leaving a legacy. So what we call surplus Roths, well, surplus Roths really are talking about if you live long enough, you're either going to completely deplete an IRA or spend down, and required minimum distributions have no impact on you, or your RMDs are going to be larger than your living expenses, and that's what creates those surplus RMDs. And that's essentially why we're using Roths as part of the discussion around managing future tax obligations. So let's talk a little bit about what the Mega Backdoor Roth is. Now, the Mega Backdoor Roth is really specifically addressing anyone who is actively employed, and it's really getting into some of the components associated with their 401k plans. Now, I already touched on this, but in 2020, you could put $19,500 in if you're under the age of 50, $26,000 total in if you're over the age of 50. Now, there is that max, $57,000 if you're under 50, $63,500 if you're over the age of 50. Now, a couple things to talk about, and this is just a quick example of the ExxonMobil plans. ExxonMobil is one of the companies that we work with a lot, but once a year, you're able to convert money in your existing non-Roth savings plan accounts in which you are fully vested to a Roth conversion account. Now, I know this is going to be confusing, so hold that thought. I've got some examples that'll make this a little clearer. You can request the conversion by December 15th of each year. Employees that are under the age of 59 and a half, they can convert funds in their after-tax account, their general account, and their stock match accounts to a Roth conversion account. However, they cannot convert funds in the before-tax account. If you're over 59 and a half, you can convert all of the different buckets that are within the 401k over to the Roth conversion account. Now, retirees and terminees can also do Roth conversions. If you happen to have a year where you either retired early in the year and you have other assets or other sources of funds to live on, or if you've been unfortunately terminated and it's going to be a lower tax year for you, those might be years that we might want to consider looking at what the conversion implications may or may not be for you. Also, one thing to note, and I'll talk about this a little bit more detail at the end, but in-plan Roth conversions will not count against the two withdrawals that you're allowed from the after-tax account each year. All right, so all of this sets the stage for what is the Mega Backdoor Roth strategy. And so the idea here is that you can actually do after-tax contributions, and you could put those into the traditional 401k. We call it the pit stop. And again, it's an after-tax, non-deductible contribution. And then you can actually have that converted over either into the Roth 401k within the plan or a Roth IRA. Now, one thing I will say is everyone's 401k is different. So it's important to talk to an advisor or tax consultant to make sure that the numbers for you align appropriately. We've got several companies that we work with their employees and we do this for. Let us help you with what those numbers actually look like. So I wanted to give a couple examples on this. So this is somebody whose salary is $175,000. So they're in the lower end of the 24% marginal tax rate. We're going to assume they're over the age of 50. Now, they're contributing 15% of their pay into the plan. They're also going to max out their catch-up contributions of $6,500 into the 401k. And they're also receiving the benefit of a company match of 7%. Now, what this looks like. So we're going to start and we're going to talk about the beginning of the year. So now until September. Now, what this looks like is the 15% of their $175,000, they're putting $2,188 per month into the plan, $2,188 into the plan. And so by the time they reach September, they actually fully max out of $19,500 a year. That's the under age 50 max out of pre-tax. Now they're also doing the catch-up contribution. I rounded the numbers here. It's $541.67, but they're doing that every single month all the way through. Now this is an example that includes a company match, and this would be 7% of their $175,000, and that's continuing to grow. So what we then did is aggregate what you have put in, and then we aggregated including the company match. So while the employee is getting the 7% match, they're putting in approximately $3,750 per month. And then these numbers here at the bottom are cumulative numbers. So by the time we get to September, they're putting in $33,563. So what this then looks like, again, if we had to talk about the end of the year, how do we really max this out? And again, this is now assuming that there's no company match for the rest of the year. And so many of you might know we do work with ExxonMobil, and ExxonMobil unfortunately discontinued or suspended their match starting on October 1st. So we're talking a little bit about an optimization scenario between now and the end of the year. But again, same situation, $175,000 a comp. But now we're putting nothing in on a before tax basis, and we're going to max out the after tax contribution that they're putting in. Still keeping up with that catch-up contribution. So we already had the $19,500 of pre-tax in there. We then are now putting in an after-tax component of approximately $39.38, but still have that catch-up, which is, again, these are cumulative numbers. And now as we're aggregating, the total amount with the company match is now up to $39,042, and we're continuing on. By the end of the year, we're at $47,000. So what this actually would then look like, we're going to be putting in $11,813 into the retirement, into the 401k. We'll put it in there, and then we're going to actually do an in-service withdrawal and take that money out and have it go over into a Roth. Now, I'm going to talk about why this matters here in a minute, but if anything, we're trying to find the lemonade out of the lemons that we've got with the current scenario of the suspension of the match. Now, I want to do an example of somebody who's a little higher in terms of compensation. So this is somebody who's fortunate enough to make $350,000 a year. They're in the 32% marginal tax bracket. Now, for them, we find that they typically do a little lower pre-tax contribution. So we're doing an 8% example here, still maxing out the catch-up contribution of $541.67. So same math applies. So at 8% of the $350,000, they are putting $2,333 a month in, and by the time they get to September, they're also maxed out of $19,500. Now, this is still including the company match. Here's the catch-up contributions. Here's the company match component, and then we add them all up. So in conjunction, including the match, total contribution for the year is $39,338. Now, to talk about what to look at for the end of the year, well, let's talk about how we can max this out. And this would be same concept. Let's look at now changing over contributions to have them be on an after-tax basis for the rest of the year. And this is where the household did 26% contribution off their $350,000 base. They were able to put $7,583 into the plan, aggregated that up, and it actually maxes it out. But when we look at these numbers in accumulation with everything else, by the time they get to the end of the year, they get to $63,500, which is the maximum amount that they're able to put into the plan. So what this looks like, we're going to actually put $22,537 into the traditional 401k. And then at the end of the year, we're going to go ahead and do an in-service withdrawal or conversion and get that money moved over into the Roth. So I want to talk a little bit about what it would look like for a full year, if assuming there's no company match. And then I'm going to talk about why this actually matters and what it looks like. So here's a full year. And I'm going to start with the $175,000 scenario. Let's assume no company match. We're going to put 12% in on a before tax basis. We're going to put 10% in on an after tax basis. And then we're going to put in the additional $541.67 of catch-up contribution to max that out for the year. So here's what those numbers actually look like. So you'd put the $19,500 in, you're going to max that out. And then we're actually going to do an additional $17,500 of after-tax contribution. We've got $6,500 of catch-up, total contribution for the year of $43,500. Now, we compare this to just putting $7,000 into the Roth, or if we had to do it into an IRA and then convert it over. But if you're at 175,000 of compensation, the direct contribute, you could do a direct contribution right into a Roth. Whereas the reason we call this mega is instead of putting 7,000 in, you're using your 401k to be able to put 17,500 in. It's really leveraging your dollars up, and you're able to get more accumulating over into the Roth IRA. Total contribution of additional, you could do a total contribution of an additional 20,000 in to really max this out and put up to 37,500 total into the Roth that year. So what it looks like, in the base case, we're going to do the 17,500 goes into the 401k. Go ahead and convert it over to the Roth. And again, you can do one conversion a year, and you can do 2 tax paid withdrawals a year from the savings plan. Now, why this ultimately matters. If you are able to put 17,500 in, and let's assume the match never comes back, and we're just using a hypothetical of doing this for 10 years, and we're using a 6% growth rate. Now, I'm going to make the argument that if you're putting money into a Roth, the Roth can probably be invested a little bit more growth oriented. So 6% might be a little low for a number. But the point is if you start accumulating and you actually put in a total of 175,000 over a 10-year period of time, so that's just 17.5 times 10, but let that grow and let that accumulate. And over that same period of time, at the end of the year, it's projected to be $239,758. That's tax-free money. And again, assuming you're over 59 and a half and the Roth's been in existence for over 5 years, it's not a bad strategy. Now, same concept here. Let's talk about the household that's at a little bit of a higher income threshold. So now we're going to do 6% on a before tax basis, max out the 19.5. We'll still do the catch-up contributions, and then we're going to do 11% on an after-tax basis. So in this example, you're going to put the 19.5 in. You'll have 37,500 of after-tax contributions in there. You will have $6,500 of catch-up, total of $63,500. Same thing. It's obviously if someone's making $350, they don't have the ability to even do a direct Roth contribution themselves. They might be able to do a backdoor strategy, but if they have an IRA, backdoor Roth conversions don't make sense. This is a way for a high income household to go ahead and get money into Roths now and more sooner than later. And it's fully maximizing it out. And so here's just the example. We're going to be putting 37,500 into the 401k. Then we would convert that over into the Roth over at the end of the year. And then just the accumulation of that. So 37,500 over a 10-year period of time, you're putting a total of 375,000 into the plan. But again, if we're using a 6% growth rate, that's going to become the equivalent of $513,768 at the end of a 10-year period of time. That's all tax-free money. So it pays to do this early as possible. And obviously, we're in a scenario where we don't know, for example, with ExxonMobil, where their match is going to come back. But it does make sense. It does make sense to go ahead and look at this as an option, especially going into 2021 and where your contributions are going to be within the savings plan. I had a couple questions come in all at once. Does Voya understand what to do when we call them? Yeah, I got to be nice because this is being recorded. I would highly, highly recommend having an advisor when you call Voya for these. Even when we're on the line, it's still somewhat challenging. And there's been a couple instances where I've had to do these calls a couple times just to get the numbers right. And we're delighted to be on the calls to help with those. Another contribution. 1,000 numbers, just want to say convert your thrift IRA contribution into a Roth each year if you want. Yeah, well, that's a good point. Really what we're saying is get your tax paid contributions converted over the Roth. You can do it each year. One thing to mention real quickly. So some employees already have tax paid contributions in their savings plans. And it's really, really important to make sure, because some of those tax paid contributions have been invested for some years now. And there probably is some growth on it. I hope there is. And if there's some growth on there, there's actually a pro rata rule that has to be calculated in terms of what can be converted. Now, when I talk specifically about the ExxonMobil plan, definitely always recommend have an advisor help you with this math. We are delighted to do it. It's part of our planning process. And we obviously want to look at what the implications are of this in conjunction with potential net unrealized appreciation. Now, I know for most employees with the stock price down, it's not as impactful as it used to be. but it's definitely something that we want to be factoring in with the entire decision that we're making. But as opposed to doing in-plan conversions, so taking the 3 different buckets and converting it over to the Roth account, you might want to consider actually doing what's called a tax-paid withdrawal. And so if we do a tax-paid withdrawal, what we need to do is take out the after-tax amount, and actually any of the attributable gain also needs to come out and be rolled into a Roth IRA. Excuse me, the gain needs to go into a traditional IRA. So the after-tax goes into the Roth, the gain portion goes into a traditional. Now, it's important to talk about these numbers. When I talk about after-tax, I'm talking about the numbers that's listed as pre-87, post-86. It's very different than the gain piece, what's listed as after-tax, because that includes the gain. All right, I want to make sure I come back to a couple of these questions. I had a bunch at once. Will the mega backdoor conversion affect the NUA strategy that uses after-tax money? Yes, it potentially will. And that's exactly the comment that I'm making here right now. But does that example make sense, since the tax rate you pay immediately to do the conversion is so high that to do so conversions versus waiting until retired when tax rate is lower? Okay, so real quick, to go back to these examples here. With the money that we're putting in here, I'm making the assumption that you have discretionary cash to be able to save. So we're putting after-tax money in, as opposed to potentially saving it in a checking account or a money market account. So we're not paying tax on, excuse me, it's money that's going in after we've already paid taxes. But when we go and we withdraw the tax paid money, the after-tax money, there's no tax on the tax paid portion. There'd only be tax attributable to any gain off of it. So I agree wholeheartedly with regards to conversions and looking at conversions in their entirety, that we really should be looking at taking the pre-tax portion and converting that when we're in lower brackets in retirement. But I'm talking right now, while you're working, if we put after-tax money into the 401k plan, we have the ability to take that after-tax money out and get it over to a Roth. All right, let's see. Do you have to roll the after-tax from the ExxonMobil 401k to a traditional IRA outside of the ExxonMobil plan and then roll to a Roth IRA outside of the ExxonMobil, or can you just roll the after-tax money directly to a Roth outside of the ExxonMobil plan with the in-service rollover? So it's the latter. So the after-tax money, when we call and do this $37,500, we're actually taking out, excuse me, hit too fast, $37,500. We're actually taking that out and it's going right into a Roth IRA. Now, if there's gain, because remember, we can do the tax paid withdrawals twice a year, or you could do an in-service conversion once a year. But if there's gain, so if we do the portion where we withdraw it, the gain has to come out and roll to an IRA. So let's just say, for example, the $37,500 becomes $40,000 by the time you get to doing the actual tax paid withdrawal. Well, if that's the case, the $37,500 will come out. That'll go to the Roth. The $2,500 worth of gain, that's going to go into a traditional IRA. All right, a couple other questions came in. Is there a better strategy to apply this approach in terms of minimizing taxes during the conversion? Some people make a special contribution at year end and then convert early in January. Others do monthly after-tax contributions and then convert at year end. Any benefits to one or the other? So to that question, the answer is yes. If you have the ability to slug it in all at once at the end of the year, that is more effective, because then there's no gain that would also needs to be factored into this math. But some people really do need the discipline of doing the monthly. Either way, I'd like to see it maxed out within the year. And if you have the ability to do it all in one shot at the end of the year, great. If not, I'd rather see you do the monthly contributions just to get it done. Should we contribute after-tax monthly in 2021 or a lump sum later in the end of the year? That's pretty much the question I just answered. I'd say either one if you have the ability. Is 2020 an ideal year to do this due to CARES Act allowing up to 100% of adjusted gross income being deducted for donations, effectively making adjusted gross income zero? Yeah. That's a good question. Let me process that one real quick. 2020 ideal year to do this due to the CARES Act allowing up to 100% of, theoretically, yes, but I would actually say if you're going to do donations up to 100% of your adjusted gross income, we actually should look at converting pre-tax amounts and offsetting the two together. That's actually a little bit different than what we're talking about here with putting after-tax dollars in. Happy to talk to you about that one-on-one. I'll reach out to you after to talk about your situation. Yeah, so Mike just commented, I wanted to clarify that these are after-tax contributions that are not taxed when moving to their Roth. So this $37,500 is not taxed on going to the Roth because it was after-tax money that went in. It's the gain portion. So again, in that example where I said it moved to 40, the 2,500, if you don't do a direct rollover to an IRA, then that would be taxed. And that's the important thing to talk about with your plans regarding in-service withdrawals versus conversions. And that's exactly what I was getting at right now. And it's important to talk about these, and it's important to talk about the difference between the two, because you can do conversions within the savings plan, but that's very different than a withdrawal. Now, as I mentioned earlier, employees that are under 59 and a half, they can convert their after-tax and general accounts, but they cannot convert their before-tax accounts. Employees who are over 59 and a half, you can convert any of the accounts over the Roth conversion account. Now, for all intents and purposes, the basis of ExxonMobil stock does not matter for conversions. You must contribute at a cost basis that basically it's the equivalent of zero. So when we convert stock, because this is the number one question we get, is should I just convert stock over to the Roth account? Well, it's important to know that ExxonMobil actually has to sell the stock and then convert cash, and that money is not actually invested for 5 to 7 days. And if there's gain on that level of conversion, you need to understand that there's going to be some tax implications on that gain, and that's where that pro rata rule comes into effect. So for example, let's say if the entire after-tax account, let's say 60% is after-tax contributions and 40% of its appreciation, then we know that if you convert 100% of the after-tax account over to the Roth, 40% of that is going to be gain. So let's say for example, your after-tax contributions are $60,000. Let's say they're now worth 100. So if we converted the full 100, you're going to have a $40,000 ordinary income bill on that conversion, and 60,000 of it's tax-free. And so that goes back to the exact conversation of why we should potentially look at doing this all in one slug at the end of the year and then immediately converting it over so there's no gain. However, if we're looking at just doing tax-paid withdrawals, we can do it at any point in time in the year. Obviously, the same example applies that if we convert 50% of the account over, well, 40% of the 50% is going to be taxable. So now going back to that example of it's worth 100 grand, let's say it's now worth 50. Well, you're going to end up having 20,000 of it be taxable as ordinary income. 30,000 would go tax-free. All right. Sorry, I had a whole bunch of questions come in, which we're making sure I get to every single one of these. If you do an in-plan thrift conversion to the Roth, will that still be a 401k? Yes. So if you do the in-plan conversions over to the Roth, you're actually moving the money from after-tax or pre-tax over into a Roth 401k bucket, which there's no harm in that. It's still growing tax-free. Just be aware when you turn 72, Roth 401ks have required minimum distributions. So prior to the age of 72, you might want to actually consider going ahead and having that distributed over into a Roth IRA. All right. One other question. Is it possible to roll over Roth 401k money to a Roth IRA without taking penalty and assuming I'm not a terminee or 59 and a half? No, unfortunately not. Roth 401k money needs to stay in as Roth 401k money. It's only the after-tax money that we can pull out and move to a Roth IRA outside of the savings plan. All right. Can you convert only the after-tax contributions in the account and not the growth, or does Voya only let you choose how much money to convert, and it will always be a combination of contributions and growth? So the answer goes back to contributions versus tax-paid withdrawals. So if you do a conversion, the conversion in plan is always going to look at that attributable growth. That's where if you have the ability to do tax-paid withdrawals, the tax-paid withdrawals can come out, the after-tax amount would go to the Roth, and any of the growth would go to a traditional IRA, and that's what precludes it from having a tax implication. All right. So I wanted to kind of wrap this up a little bit. One of the calls to action anytime we do these events is to actually sit down and run the numbers for anybody. It's absolutely no cost. It's absolutely no obligation. As we're following up, we'd be delighted to sit down and run the numbers for you. We could set up a meeting at any one of our 3 office locations, and we're doing a lot of them virtually right now. But we're delighted to do it. And again, it's absolutely no cost, and it is absolutely no obligation. I had another question come in. Do you have to remove all funds from your Voya ExxonMobil 401k? I've heard that you have to at age 65 and retired. So that question is, the answer is no. You're not forced to take money out of your 401k plan ever. However, if you have NUA, then and you need to take money out of the 401k to live, well, a distribution could disqualify your ability to do NUA. Also, if you are now turning 72 and you have required minimum distributions, that distribution itself could also preclude you from doing NUA. To be honest, the savings plan, 401k is one of the lowest cost options in terms of investment platforms. However, you're only limited to those 7 different options. You only get 2 trades a month. You only get the average price the following day. It's just something to be aware of. I do think that there are really low cost options now from an investment perspective that allows you to get a lot more diversification. But back to the original question, are you forced to take it out at 65 and retired? No, you're not. We have clients who retire in their 60s. They leave it there for several years. But again, that age 72 thing for RMDs starts to have an implication on the timing of when you want to pull it out. All right, I had a couple others. So your answer means that you will always have a tax bill for an in-plan conversion because the plan conversion will always be a mix of contributions and growth. Well, yes, that is correct if there is growth there. If there's not growth, then there won't be a tax bill. But if you do in-plan conversions, yes, there's no way of only converting after tax within the savings plan. Mike wanted me to explain the difference between an in-plan versus an outside Roth, being able to split out the growth if rolled outside. Yeah, so apparently we've got some other questions coming in on that. So going back to this slide here, specifically talking about the difference between a tax-paid withdrawal that has growth to it versus an in-plan conversion. So if we put after-tax money in, we're able to take the after-tax money out and there's no tax on what we put in. Now, if we have gain on what we put in, then the gain can be rolled over to a traditional IRA and the after-tax amount can go to a Roth. Whereas if we do an in-plan conversion, and if there's no gain, we can convert that over and there is no tax implication there. If there's gain, then yes, there would be a portion that would be attributable and have gain on it. So it's important to just understand the two and when we're doing these types of contributions. All right, another question came in. The NUA trigger at retirement, why is that? Why is the window to apply this trigger? So NUA, we have a whole webinar on NUA, by the way. But NUA, it stands for net unrealized appreciation. And so what happens is there's 3 triggers for NUA. If you've retired after the age of 55 and attained separation of service, meaning you had over 15 years of service, or you'd reached the age of 59 and a half, or death/disability. Now, the last 2 are not very good options. But the reason I made the comment earlier, if someone's over the age of 59 and a half and they have left their savings plan at Voya, and the plan is to use the savings plan as their income or where they're going to generate their retirement paycheck, well, in order to qualify for NUA, you have to do what's called a lump sum distribution, and that means you have to take the entire savings plan out of Voya within 1 calendar year. So if you're taking money out for living and you're over the age of 59 and a half, you could potentially kill your ability to do NUA. So I think it's important, if you're going to leave the savings plan at Voya, make sure that you've got a cash flow strategy in place with other assets. Leave the savings plan alone until you're ready to figure out what you want to do from an NUA perspective. And by the way, part of our planning process, we're going to go through a very detailed understanding on NUA, and we have a tool that Pete in our office has built that's phenomenal, where we talk about different scenarios, different thresholds for what NUA makes sense. And that's just part of what we're going to be doing from a planning perspective. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up, and I'm sure there might be some more questions that are going to come in on this. Please feel free. Here's our contact information. You can email myself or anyone on our team. We're delighted to. Again, we're recording this. Happy to send it out. I know it's complicated. The big thing I would say as a takeaway is let us help you with the numbers. Not only what makes sense from a conversion perspective or an in-service withdrawal perspective, but what also you should be looking at doing from a contribution perspective into your 401ks. Every plan is going to be different. So whether you're Shell or Chevron or Kaiser or SAP, I know we've got all of those on the webinar today. Let us help you with what the math that makes the most sense for your situation. Again, thank you very much. Please take advantage of filling out the survey. We'd love to get feedback. I know this is a complicated one, and we're happy to be a resource however we can help. Thank you.